Podcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome to our Swarm webinar entitled Data is Not Enough. You need superpowers too. My name is Andy Mawakdi. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer of Swarm. We're a company that's focused on optimizing supply chain problems for food and ag producers. Welcome. So over the last decade or so, the food and ag industry has seen an explosion of data from a variety of sources, including IoT devices, drone images, all the way to run the business applications. And the volume of this data has overwhelmed many organizations who are trying to gain actionable insight and optimization of critical supply chain processes. There's also an additional cost associated with making sense of this data when you consider the expense to acquire talent with BI, AI, and machine learning expertise. So at Swarm, we believe there's a better way. And in this session, we're going to look deeper into the challenges and opportunities that companies are facing in this area. And we're going to discuss Swarm's innovative approach to solving supply chain problems that have a financial impact to your organization. We're also going to share our perspective on the future of food and ag. And I've got two great speakers here today to kind of lead us out in this discussion. First is my colleague, Anthony Howcroft. He's the CEO and founder of Swarm. He's also an accomplished author and an Amazon best-selling author, in fact, with his new nonfiction book called Questions. Anthony and I have worked together for more than 15 years, including a 5-year stint at Microsoft, where collectively we ran the global operation for Microsoft's big data team. Anthony has a software engineering background and a creative writing diploma from Oxford University. And he's also from England and grew up on a rural farm, which was part of Europe's largest cattle market. And he often tells me the story about him running through summers being chased through fields of barley by farmers with shotguns. So I'm glad that he made it through that. Also joining us is Dave Donen. Dave's a business leader and a consultant with significant global experience in the ag business, food, and retail space. And during Dave's career, he's run companies, he's managed food plants, and he's consulted to leading global retail and consumer product companies in technology, supply chain strategies, and market positioning. Dave's an adjunct associate professor at Northwestern University. He's teaching a graduate course on the future of sustainable food and agriculture. And he's also a partner emeritus with Kearney, an international management consulting firm. So Anthony and Dave, I want to welcome you both and thank you for leading the discussion today. And before I hand it over to Dave, I want to encourage all of you that are joining us today online to please post any questions that you have in the chat window. And we'll get to those at the end of the presentation. So with that, let me pass it over to you, Dave, to kick us off. Dave, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you. And yes, glad to be here and a chance to talk with all of you out in the podcast. So right now, food and agriculture is at an exciting time. I mean, we are going through a lot of change. I mean, first of all, we have to look at how the agriculture system is going to be meeting the needs over the next 20 to 30 years as our population swells from 7.5 million to over 10 billion, 7.5 billion to over 10 billion people by 2050. We have to do this with shrinking availability of land and water, increased global greenhouse gas emissions, and a lack of biodiversity. A lot of challenges that we have, and not the least of which is animal and human pandemics, of which we're facing right now. But also during this time, we're also seeing some amazing innovations going on, from precision farming with sensors and satellite data, vertical controlled environmental farming with urban farming, vertical farming, looking at different types of greenhouse technologies. We're seeing plant-based proteins make a major impact with plant-based proteins like the Impossible Burger or Beyond Meat, to even looking now at cellular-based proteins made with bioreactors from stem cells. And the amount of innovation and new thinking in food and agriculture is unprecedented. In addition, the entire area of artificial intelligence and machine learning are having a big impact to the food and agriculture, from supply chain optimization to better use of consumer data to target personalized attributes. So I think as you put all of these together, a lot of change is going on some of it is going to be headwinds for us as we go forward, but many are also going to be tailwinds as we're going to see new innovations and new thinking coming into the industry. If you go to the next slide. So if we look at our overall the challenges and the opportunities the industry presents, there are several factors that are influencing individual companies. First of all, competition. Competition has become more intense as new competitors emerge from adjacent industry sites, such as entrepreneurs and startups funded by VCs and SPACs. We also have cross-channel competitors in retail between convenience, grocery, drug, and QSR. Right now, we have, with the pandemic and takeout foods, grocery stores are trying to become quick service restaurants, as convenience stores as well try to service the takeout food market. Traditional legacy brands, the Krafts and the Mondeleses and the Kellogg's and the General Mills and the ConAgras of the world, are trying to reignite their growth after the pandemic. They saw immense growth come to bear during 2020 as people went to more shelf-stable foods. But now as the pandemic is starting to see its final days, the growth needs to be sustained, and they're going to be looking at new innovations and new ways of trying to compete. The second major area is a whole area of complexity. We have more consumer choices, increased environmental constraints, multiple sales channels, online delivery, third-party delivery. The complexity of business models is becoming more intense. Simple business choices have been replaced by multi-layered decision trees and combinatorial problem sets. So our world is becoming much more complex as the choices for consumers, the choices for manufacturers, the choices for retailers are all coming to bear. In addition to, we're seeing more regulatory pressure as well, an environmental regulatory pressure, around social justice regulatory pressure, around economic regulatory pressure, all are adding to the complexity that the industry must manage within. And third, all of these have impact on margins. They put additional pressure on margins. Retail prices is challenged by a growth at any cost of venture capital-backed startups. And we've seen many startups go several years without profitability in order to get market share and in order to get some foothold in the market. That puts real pressure on other food companies as they're trying to deal with margins and trying to manage the industry when we've got many companies trying to disrupt the status quo. Margins become the area where companies are really trying to fixate and find better solutions to what is becoming a more serious issue to deal with. And the next slide as well. As we look at 2020 and 2020, the business buzzword was pivot. As companies pivoted from running, full with all of their restaurant and food service and grocery stores, they had to pivot to new channels, new supply chains, new ways of getting through to consumers during the pandemic. In 2021, the words will be agility and resilience, a need to adapt to shifting business environment and changing consumer demands. So is big data one of the things that can be brought to the rescue? We hope it is, but several challenges exist. Big data has been used quite extensively by many people in media, by companies, by a lot of different parts of the stakeholders within the industry, and always used as a way of solving the problems. But the problems with big data are the constraints as well. Where can I hire all these data scientists I need? Where are they going to come from in order to analyze this immensity of data we have? How do I deal with this deluge of data? I've got data coming from sensors, from IoT devices, from consumer insights, from consumer panel studies, from supply chain. How do I deal with all of this in a way that makes sense, that I can actually get true insights? And third, which tools should I use to solve the increasingly complex and changing business problems? Each one of them are creating a level of complexity and uncertainty. And with all of this, we get through what's called the classic paralysis through analysis. We've got more data to analyze, we've got more data inputs coming at us, and we're just not sure where to start. Let's go to the next page. There we go. We have seen several textbook cases of complex problems that have been tackled using big data analytics, pattern recognition, and machine learning. We know where the problem lies, but unable to determine how best to fix it. And I think each of us know that if I only had a better insight, if I only had a better way of understanding all of this data that's coming at me, I would be able to make better decisions. I would be able to solve some of these problems. Rather than just identifying where the problem exists, how do I actually go about using this information, using big data, using all of the resources that are there? How do I use them efficiently and effectively to actually solve the problem? For example, the field has an irrigation issue. Field level optimization problems dealing with irrigation, fertilizer application, crop nutrition, and crop protection have been around for a while. How much and what to invest in every square meter of the land? The complexity has increased because now with precision agriculture, I can get data on a much more finite and much more precise areas within my land. So how do I know how to optimize all of the different attributes on the effectiveness of the different crop protection and crop nutrition chemicals, or how do I use the effectiveness of soil and sunlight and water all together to come up with the optimum planting regimen? Trucking is another issue. Truck routing and utilization issues have been around with some fairly good software solutions. But now, what is the optimal for each specific location? How do I optimize by DC, by factory, by customer? And how do I pull those all together into an overall supply chain system? How much wait time? How much unloading time? What delivery sequence should I follow? How often and how frequent should I be doing deliveries? These are all valid questions to answer. And these are, again, where we have the raw data to analyze it, but not necessarily the way of putting that data together to make it into a coherent and solvable solution. And finally, in forecasting, how do I improve yields when I cannot fully understand all the data inputs? How do I look at my soil pH, nutrient load, light spectrum, humidity, irrigation schedule, all aspects of crop propagation and growth cycle that I need to optimize on? Right now, space, if you look at the indoor farms and the controlled atmosphere farms, they're taking data from sensors from soil, humidity, nutrition, spectrum of sunlight, and being able to optimize it using very advanced techniques. Not every company has access to this type of information or the data scientists to do that. And so actionable insights telling you what needs to be fixed and how to fix it become very important. So how do we tackle these issues? I'm going to turn it over to Anthony now to really walk you through how Swarm Engineering is working with clients to work through these types of issues.
Thank you, Dave. That was a great outline of both the challenges and also, I think, the opportunities. I think, you know, big data has huge promise if we can really unleash its power. And sometimes, having worked in data for a long time, it feels like the more data we add, the more problems we find. It reminds me of that scenario when you first download a new piece of security software or switch on a corporate security system. And the first thing it does is it tells you about the 200 remediations and fixes that are required to make your system secure. And you think, wouldn't it be great if you could just fix them rather than just telling me I've got more problems? And I sometimes feel like that's what we're doing with data. And it feels like the point of software should surely be to make our lives easier. But it doesn't always feel that way. So a couple of years ago, I went to see the latest Marvel movie with my wife and daughter and her friends. And afterwards, the girls were playing that game where you choose which superpower you'd most like. It sort of stuck in my mind. And not that long ago, we played that game with some leaders in food supply chain and asked them what agricultural superpowers they would like. And here are the answers we actually got from them, the ones that came out frequently. I suspect the pandemic was probably on the minds of several people who answered this for us. You know, we all wish we could have used our precognition to see COVID coming. And maybe a superpower of adaptability to handle some of the disruption, or telepathy maybe to work out what our business partners were actually doing about that disruption and how that would impact us. We were actually working at the time with an egg producing company, and there was a great demand for eggs, as people obviously see it as a core food, and also there was a lot of home baking going on. So at the beginning of COVID, there was big demand for eggs. But interestingly enough, it was certainly in the area around me, it was very hard to get eggs in the grocery stores. And it turns out that was because liquid eggs, which is what they use in restaurants where they can measure out more precisely the quantity of eggs, liquid eggs had stopped making liquid eggs because the restaurants were all shutting and had switched to making shell eggs. And it meant that there was a shortage of egg cartons. So it's a really interesting thing that the real disruption in that particular industry sector was egg cartons were in short supply, which is why there weren't enough eggs in the stores. So it would have been great if people could A, see the future, or B, understand what their partners were doing or what was happening in the market to really have those superpowers to solve those problems. And if you put those powers in the context of food supply challenges, you can see how these abilities could make a huge difference in reducing our costs, lowering our carbon footprint, and doing, as Dave had on his earlier slide, more with less. So there's some examples here, but there's plenty of things you can imagine, I'm sure, about how you could use these in your own business to make a huge difference. Mastery is an interesting one. There was an old children's TV program that I used to watch as a kid in the UK called Joe 90, and the hero was a 9-year-old boy who could have the expertise of any person transferred to him by sitting in this strange spinning device they had at the start of each episode. And in one adventure, he might be an archaeologist, and in another, he'd be a deep sea diver or an experienced pilot. And he'd use those skills, plus the fact that nobody expected a 9-year-old boy to have such mastery, to accomplish secret missions for the benefit of society. And I was always fascinated by that concept. And when you think about the latest advances in AI and machine learning, it feels like some of that incredible expertise and knowledge is now almost at our fingertips, the ability to do things that we couldn't imagine before. But unfortunately, it's still just too hard for most of us to use these tools. So it feels like we need to make the latest AI and machine learning easy enough for any of us, even a 9-year-old boy, to master. Maybe not within sitting inside some spinning device, but maybe with a click of a button, we can actually master some of these technologies that are coming out. So let's take a look at a real example of superpowers in action, if you like. This is based on a grower we actually have been working with for a little while, and they purchase 30 or so perishable food products from about 50 suppliers, and they've got distribution centers across North. And the inventory every week varies by supplier for each of the different products, as does the quality. And the transportation costs from each supplier to each distribution center are different too. And they have some contracts in place which they have to comply with, where they have some minimum purchase amounts with each of the suppliers based on certain products. So it's a fairly complex product. There's a lot of moving parts there to work out what to actually purchase, how to do this and transport it at the most cost efficient way. And also, because it's perishable, they have to be careful about the yield and so on as well. So, if they had telepathy, maybe they'd know how much each of the products the suppliers had. And if they had precognition, they could accurately predict the demand that the distribution centers would need. Now, with big data and the latest machine learning, you can actually do that. You can make some very, very accurate predictions and pull some of that information in. But the problem is, to do that, you really need to be a master in AI. And in this particular company, they didn't have any data scientists with that specific expertise. And even if they could find people who were an expert on machine learning, people who understood the growing business they were in, didn't have that specific mastery of the AI machine learning. So we were able to actually put something in place with those three capabilities, which saved them, as you see on the slide, 5 to 8%. It was actually a significant amount, over $100,000 a week, which was a great ROI. But perhaps more importantly, what it also did was save them a huge amount of time, because this was a process that took a handful of people half a day every week, and actually we were able to do in a few minutes. So when I look at this sort of example, this really is what Swarm is designed to do. We're here to solve food supply chain problems without the users needing any specialist AI or coding skills. We believe in separating the problem definition from the solution, so that the business users can really focus in on their goals and not worry about all the data science needed to achieve them. We do make use of the data and the apps already in your business. You've probably spent a fortune on those things already, and nobody wants to see that investment wasted. And while we typically start by optimizing one specific area, like load planning or yield forecasting, but really what we look to do is join those silos together. We actually call it a MOOP, a multi-objective optimization problem. And we can link optimizations together to basically improve the whole process from end to end. So that's fundamentally what we're doing as a company. That's what we're driving in the industry. Now, I know that all sounds a little bit like magic, so I thought I'd show you how we go about doing this. This is the Swarm modeling tool. It's actually branded for our customers, so it looks like a corporate thing. CTI is a made-up company. We have our equivalent of the Microsoft Contoso model, where we have a little demonstration set with data we can share with people. But it would be your company logo in the top left-hand corner there. So in this scenario, what we're doing is creating the definition of a new problem, or a challenge, we like to call it. Nobody likes to see lots of problems in their business, so we like to look at them as challenges that we can meet. So the dots on the left, the circles, show the steps I'm going to go through to define the challenge. It takes about an hour and a half to go through the whole thing and really fill it in for a genuine problem. I'm just going to do a handful of these here to just show you the approach and give you how it actually works as a feeling. So the first thing I do is I pick an example use case or an example scenario from this carousel, and you can see I've chosen load planning here. There's a little description, it looks roughly correct. And by picking an existing model like this one, it speeds up how long it takes me to define my challenge, and it gives me a few hints and tips as well, and some guidance based on what other people have done. But I can edit the model any way I want, or I can actually create a completely new challenge or any scenario from scratch. You can see on the right there the build your own. So I could do a oil and gas blending or something totally different. But we do have use cases for the primary ones in the food supply chain already modeled out. So I'm going to save this and move on to the next step. You can see on the left, the first dot has now turned orange, which shows that's completed, and I'm now on this second step. And this is really just a high-level overview of the challenge. My organization description has actually been pulled in for me. I only need to define that once for my organization. And I've started to type in a quick sort of executive summary on what it is I actually want to do. And in this case, I had a picture I'd actually done this in PowerPoint, and I just dragged this picture in. So I've got an illustration which shows at a high level what it is I'm trying to do as well. So this is very easy stuff to complete for a domain expert in the business. You get stepped through, you get asked some questions as you go through these stages, but it's stuff that people who are running this particular business area would find very easy to answer and collate the information they need. So let me skip forward a couple of steps and I'll look at the goal and show you what we have on the goal. So this is a simple table pre-populated for the classic metrics of load planning. And if we don't like the goal or the metrics here, we decide we've got something different in our business, I can change them. So let's say, for example, that all of my loads are FTL. I don't use any LTL. And you can see the last metric there, the percentage of loads FTL. Maybe that's meaningless for my business because I'm only doing FTL. So I could just hit that trash can icon and just delete it. So I can remove that one. And now I look at the other ones there. Maybe I've got a European headquarters and I measure price per kilometer instead of price per mile. So I could overtype that and maybe add another row and put my own metric in. So there we go. I've typed in price per kilometer and I'm going to click. So what might be important to me, maybe the split of loads that go with my internal fleet. Maybe I have an internal fleet and I use third-party logistics firms as well. So I could actually just add that in as a metric and show that. So there we go, percentage of loads on the internal fleet. I can move these up and down if I want to show a different priority. I can add them. I can even add a note. So let me just type in a note on the total transportation costs. So I can pop that in as well. So I think you get the idea here, which is the tool is a very, very flexible way to build a standard description of a challenge. And people in your organization get used to reading these very, very quickly because it's a completely standard approach. We've got tables like the one you're seeing here for various steps, the levers, the constraints, the outputs that you see on the left there. And we also have some, you know, some more tabular things where you can, some areas where you can type in text, just put some notes on next steps and outstanding questions and so on. And you can even attach files if they help people understand the scenario. I might have specific lanes that I've documented somewhere that I could drag in a document, or pricing, or customer opening windows for their delivery slots. So let me jump ahead. I'm going to go through all of these steps. I'm just going to jump forward because one of the other critical elements when you're building a challenge definition is getting feedback and buy-in from the other stakeholders. So a critical part here in this process is to define who you want to review, edit, or sponsor this definition that you're building. So you can see here I've added several people. I've got some reviewers who'll be able to comment on the model for me. I've also added a business sponsor and a technical sponsor who can give some validation to what I'm doing. And I've got one of my colleagues I've actually added as an editor because it may be some areas of the constraint that I may need Barney, in this case, to come in and actually take a look at. I can also set the privacy level on the right there. So this is something when I publish it, which I'll do in a moment, I'll actually be able to say whether it'll go to these people I've invited, but I can also say whether it's just available internally or whether it's something I'm going to make publicly available and ask people to comment on, or just keep it purely for myself initially. So I've got all those various steps I can do to decide who's going to see this document when I publish it. And when I do publish this, what people will receive on that invitation list is a formatted PDF with all of the information you saw me entering into the challenge definition. You'll see the illustration there, the business description, the information I'll have captured on the process scale, and those tables, the metric and goals that we had, and the levers and so on. We've had an incredibly positive reaction to this report. They're pretty short, they're 7 or 8 pages typically, but they're very, very clear, and they define in a succinct way exactly what the challenge is in the business. And the really nice thing is we've tried this now on multiple different scenarios, from the commodity trading to yield forecasting, and it works in all of those different scenarios. So it's a standardized way to help people really understand what the key issue is in their business that they're trying to tackle. So, which comes down to what I mentioned earlier. At Swarm, we believe strongly that separating the problem from the solution is critical, and also that the business should own that definition. And we're not the only ones who think that way either. Here's one of Einstein's comments on problems. I actually saw an amazing digital assistant version of Einstein as a sort of digital agent that's been done by the company Unique the other day. And I was playing around. You can ask him questions, and I asked him several questions about problems. And Einstein has a whole stack of great quotes about how you tackle problems. And all of them seem to come down to the fact that he believes the definition and the time spent on the definition is critical. And we completely agree. And we think that's something that the business should do and own for itself. It's a core capability. Ultimately, though, the problem is no use unless you have a solution for it. So our platform provide that too. So we're not just producing a pretty document. We actually use the metadata from the definition to match directly to an AI solution. And the way we've laid out that information in the document and the way we capture it is so that it's machine readable for the machine learning layer we've built within our Swarm software to actually be able to match to algorithmic solutions. So I'll show you, I've got the little bit here at the bottom of the slide that just explains technically what the platform is. I'm happy to go into more detail on that, but I think for most people, the key is that we're running as a SaaS platform, software as a service on Microsoft Azure. It's an enterprise class platform that scales up to support the scale of your business. And because it's SaaS, it also means we can deliver rapid value. There's no installation mess to deal with. Our platform is up and running as soon as you're ready. So you know it's very easy to set this up and get it running quickly in an environment. Whatever ERP or TMS systems or warehouse management system you're running, we can interface to those. So so this is you've seen the definition of the problem. This is what the business do. Underneath it, we have this platform that has the algorithms that can map and solve those problems. So what does it look like to an end user who's actually just saying, well, I just want to do the load planning or solve my problem? So the person that runs the system gets a very simple, powerful, and easy to use dashboard that keeps them fully in control of the process. So the first thing they do is they see the inputs, and this can be a range of different tables or information. This example in the top right, although it's a small font there, I can see this is actually a list of customers and their GPS coordinates and addresses. There's a drop down there I can pick. I can see a list of the sales orders that have come from the customer. So I can look at all of the information that I've got that is, if you like, feeding my my solution, and I can actually include or exclude or even edit this data before I do anything. So we keep the person that runs the process fully in control of the information that is going into the system. Second thing they do is they literally click that round button with the play icon in, and the solution runs in 1 to 2 minutes, which is often doing the work that used to take 5 or 6 hours in many of the organizations we've worked with. So clearly, AI algorithms are incredibly powerful and able to handle things that humans just find very difficult. So we're taking advantage of that. We can do something in minutes that used to take hours. And what the system pushes out is a set of results, and these results are actually defined in the challenge definition as well. You actually say, here's what I want. I want a load plan. I want a summary of the load plan. I want to see which or I want to see what a yield forecast might be, or which commodities I should buy from which locations. So whatever the challenge is, the results are placed here in a format that are defined by the end user. And they, again, still refine and change those. So often this process is iterative. In the load plan example, I might choose some of the loads to accept. I might reject some of them and go back and make some adjustments and rerun this. So it's an iterative process I can go through. But ultimately, the user is still in control. So the system has made recommendations. The AI is there to augment and guide, but the user is still making the final decision. And when they're ready, they publish that. And they can publish that data to the next stage in the workflow, which could be pushing that info into a TMS system, could be pushing data into an ERP, it could be simply producing a report which gets circulated via email. So whatever the next step of the integration is, we can do that and push the information flow through to the next layer of the organization. So that's given you hopefully a quick overview of what we're doing at Swarm and how the platform works. Just wanted to step back from it and look at what we think we'll see happening in AI machine learning in the food supply chain. COVID clearly has been a huge disruption, but it's not the first one, and it won't be the last. We've seen, Amazon acquiring Whole Foods was very disruptive for many players in the food supply chain. And we're seeing just more and more disruption, and it's coming faster and faster at the companies. And the other thing we're seeing is increasingly with the amount of data flowing through that Dave was describing earlier, we're seeing that more businesses are making decisions based on algorithms. And so we believe there'll be an algorithm war where often the success of a business will rely on having the right algorithm for these key core areas of the business. So there's three real approaches we've seen organizations taking. One is the thing where they're replacing individual applications with ones that have got AI and machine learning built in. And that gives a quick hit, a quick fix, if you like, that's great for that area. But the challenge there is that the algorithms and AI is progressing at such an incredible rate that these systems are legacy almost as soon as they're implemented. And unfortunately, if you're buying an app that's got an AI system built in, they've chosen an AI application when they built it into the code, and it's going to stay there, and it'll take a while before it gets changed. So we think this is a dangerous strategy when you see that the future is about algorithm wars. So the second approach is basically to plug in one large supply chain system across everything. Now, we call that the new SAP because it's a big implementation. It's costly. It can be very powerful when it's done well, but it's also quite very expensive in both time and money, and difficult to implement. You do get great opportunities for machine learning, especially reinforcement learning, when you have all the data in one place. But it is a challenging approach to take, and it does restrict the innovation in the future as well. So the most common approach we're seeing the larger enterprises take is working with the applications they've got, upgrading them as they see fit, but building an underlying data lake and then trying to run AI machine learning off the data lake beneath it. And it's tough to do, but it can be done. Andy and I at Microsoft were working on this with multiple retailers and telcos in particular 5 or 6 years ago. So you can do this, and it's a great solution. The challenge is that the data science team rapidly becomes a bottleneck in the business. So we think there's an alternative, and we call it the democratization of AI. So it's a bit like business intelligence. BI made advanced report writing and analytics something available to everyone. Well, we see an opportunity to actually let everyone have access to AI and machine learning solutions without needing to master them, without having to be an expert in them. So the way that would work is you still have your applications, you're still building some data lakes. Realistically, you're going to have some data puddles and some ponds here and there as well still. But what you want to do is let the business users define the problems and then automatically deploy the solutions. And instead of the data scientists being a bottleneck, the data scientists are adding algorithms to a corporate library, which can be reused by those solutions. So you break that problem and solution split, and you say, okay, business users, go away, define a problem. If there is a solution, it can be automatically mapped and deployed instantly. If there isn't, then the data scientist can plug a new one in, but he only needs to do that once because then it can be deployed across multiple solutions. So we think this approach is a much better one for really driving out value across the food supply chain. And there's one other thing we can do, which I mentioned when I first introduced Swarm, which is we also think it's important to link these applications together. So we allow you to create an optimization, which is a multi-objective optimization, a MOOP, which basically lets you look at the value for the whole process rather than just optimizing in silos. And that's another critical piece. It's the value chain that has the most important result, not the individual engineering or growing or logistic area. You need to get the end-to-end value, and that's something specifically we've built into the product. So we've spent the last few years building our platform, working with our first customers. And just like Clark Kent here on the right, we've been hiding in plain sight. That's going to change later this year as we're going to emerge from our phone booth and make the model free for anyone to use. we think it has huge value in its own right, and certainly the early customers we've done this with completely agree. I had the president of a major ag firm raving about this to the CIO recently on a call we were on. So it's been incredibly well received. When you combine the challenge definitions with automated AI solutions that we have, you've got a huge potential to make a massive impact at your organization. And so I love this, this admittedly very famous quote from the sci-fi writer Arthur C. Clarke. But our goal is to make technology appear magical to end users. Basically to give you superpowers which you can use to improve your food supply chain. We'd love to see you ripping off your shirts, reveal your gleaming superhero outfit, and hopefully a Swarm logo underneath that. Andy's our Chief Revenue Officer, you met at the beginning, and I know he'd love to speak with you and find ways to make you a superhero in your organization. Thank you very much.
Well, that was great, Anthony and Dave, both. Thank you very much for your insights, for the overview on Swarm, and the perspective on what's happening in the industry. I think we'll open it up for some questions. We've got a few minutes left. If you've got a question, again, just type it in the chat window, and we'll do our best to answer that for you. I do see one coming in. This one I think is for you, Dave. What are your thoughts in general on consolidation in the food industry? So, for example, do you see big corporates like Purdue acquiring the next Impossible Chicken? Or on the technology side, do you see startups as being good targets for some of these big corporates? And if so, in what areas?
Yeah, I think consolidation is going to be accelerating, and the reason being is that we are seeing a lot of startups, a lot of venture capital firms, a lot of incubators and accelerators for new companies around the United States. And the larger companies have all set their own venture capital arms as well. So, you know, Kraft has Springboard, and there's Kellogg has their own, and General Mills has their own. And they're looking for some of these disruptive innovations. And so many of the exits of these small startups as they grow have been quite good from a valuation perspective. Look at RX bars or some of the others that have just come out. And so I think there is going to be this need for some of the large companies to look at acquiring some of these companies and building in their new technologies and their new products. And you know, that will continue this innovation realm. Right now, venture capital money in agri-tech and food tech are at an all-time high. And I think we're seeing, because of with the pandemic, the vulnerability that our supply chain, our food supply chain has. And so many companies are working to look at ways of making it more robust, more resilient. And the large food companies want to be part of that as well.
Yeah, that's great. And we see that as well in the conversations that we're having with many of the corporates. So thank you for that. Anthony, one of the questions that popped up regarding the Swarm platform, given we're using AI in the solution, you know, what happens to the people that are doing the job previously, right? We bring this technology in. What kind of impact does that have on folks that are already doing the work?
Yeah, it's a great question, very important one around the ethics. I mean, the simple answer is that they get better at doing their job. You know, they have more time to focus on higher value activities. We don't replace them, we augment them. So the planner in the load planning example I had up before still makes the final decisions on their plan. But all of the hard work of trying to fit the multiple combinations of complex data together, all of that's gone. We believe that human plus AI partnership is the way forward. So our system doesn't replace anyone, it really augments what the people are doing. And that's why we let them control the inputs and the outputs. It's really critical. You'll never implement a technology like this if you just try and replace people. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah, yeah. Great, thank you. There's one more that's sort of a combined question. How do we engage with Swarm, and you know, how big of a company do we need to be in order to justify bringing the platform in for evaluation or for proof of concept?
Yeah, no, good question again. I mean, in terms of how big do you need to be, we're looking for a minimum cost saving of $1 million. And given that we typically see, you know, 10% savings on a process, we're targeting processes that have a spend of, you know, 5 to 10 million. So it's not so much about the size of the business, more about how much you're spending on the key processes. You know, if you're spending 10 million or so on logistics, or you're buying $20 million of a particular product and shipping that through inbound logistics, then there's a good chance that you're the right size for us to work with you. In terms of the engagement model, that's very simple. We just start with a discovery call to learn about the business and which areas you believe could benefit most from cost savings, and critically that have some supporting data that we could use as well. And then we hold a call with the team to scope out the challenge definition that you actually saw. And we build one of those challenge definitions with you. So we put an NDA in place, we get some data sent to us, and we benchmark and show you the potential savings. And if you and we both think there's a good opportunity, we then move into a 2-week pilot where we stream live data and show actual results and compare them side by side with your current process. And I should say we don't charge for any of that either. And at the end of the process, if you like what you see and you're seeing the savings and the value, we simply switch on the system and use it in production, which is charged by a monthly subscription fee. So it's a very frictionless way of doing business. It does take a little bit of time, but you're talking about a handful of days spread over a month or so. And that's it from the engagement model. Simple.
Great, thank you. Let's see, looks like there's one more here. Dave, I think this one's for you regarding consulting firms. How do firms and AI SaaS firms work with small and mid-sized food companies? And I guess to that end, what is the advisory model that works best?
Well, you find depending on the size of the company, obviously very large companies tend to go out and hire advisory consulting firms where they'll bring in the data scientists and the business analysts and the consultants to try to, first define the problem and then go through a set of solution sets. Obviously, for smaller companies, you can't afford to have the large consulting firms come in and spend the time. And often they'll go to turnkey solutions, and they're often solutions that are specifically designed to solving one problem. Best case in the food industry is least cost formulations. So we can have finding a formulation optimization based on various inputs and then, values of protein and water and fat, things like that, and coming up with a optimized feed solution or an optimized solution for foodstuffs. In between is really where kind of the gap is that, you don't want just a standard off-the-shelf package, but you can't afford all of the labor, resources, consultants of the big custom application. So you're looking for something which is much more, has aspects of plug and play, being able to dive into a library of use cases, being able to pull together use cases in different ways so that you can solve the problem. And I think that's where Swarm has particularly focused, is that kind of middle market where we're looking for companies that want to solve the problems using a best practice and user defined problem solutions, and having a use case library of best practices that can be applied in an optimization approach. And I think that's where it works very, very well, much better than the expensive consultant role, and obviously better than the kind of standalone focused turnkey solution as well.
Yeah, no doubt. Thank you for that. That's great. I'm looking at the queue. I don't see any other questions. I'll give it one more minute before we wind up here. Anybody else have any questions they'd like to pose to the presenters? Okay. Well, let me first thank our speakers, Dave and Anthony, for sharing perspectives and insights today. I think it was a great session. And to all the participants on the call today and out in the audience, we really appreciate your time and hope you found this session useful. You see the slide here up on the screen. If you want to get in touch with us, I encourage you to reach out if you have additional questions, or if you've got an area within your supply chain that you'd like to discuss further, we'd be happy to engage. So thank you, everyone. I hope you found it useful, and hope you have a great afternoon.